My name's Neville Brody, and I'm a graphic designer. And I've lived and worked in London my whole life. I was actually born in Tottenham, Edmonton, just around the corner from the Spurs Stadium in White Hart Lane. So London is always the place I've come back to. It's always been my base, even though I think in the last 20 years we've had less than 5% of our billing and clients have been London-based. But it's a place that has always attracted creative people. And London, everyone passes through. It's a major hub of traffic, even though a lot of people running through it aren't actually based here. When I started, well, I mean, obviously I went to school in North London. And then I went to Hornsey College of Art in Crouch End. And it was the birthplace in 1968 of the student uprising in the UK. And had a great pull. It still had that kind of political undercurrent when I studied there. This was back in 1975, 76. And I then went to London College of Printing, as it was called back in 76. And that was at the Elephant and Castle, which is probably the worst place in the world to study. And the London College of Printing at that time was, let's say, 80% printers, local printers, apprentices, you know, with the Sun newspaper in the back pocket and practicing the famous phrase, "You can't do that, mate." And I was there for 3 years doing graphic design course. I went there to learn the basics and to understand exactly how typography is supposed to work in terms of the rules. And it happened at the same time as punk, which was probably the most influential thing that happened to me in London. And the punk explosion just pushed all of that out the window. In the third year of college, I moved into a squat in Covent Garden, which was on the corner of James Street and Longacre. This was before the market was open. I remember there was just 2 or 3 interesting stores there. There was PS, Practical Styling. I think Paul Smith had just about started his first store in Floral Street at the time. And there was the Vortex Club, which was on Neal Street. Then the 100 Club, which was just up the road in Oxford Street. I'm moving into this corner building. I mean, it was a huge squat. There was maybe 120, 150 people in the squat. And the whole of my third year in college was spent there. I had the whole of the first floor across 2 houses above, I think it was now Abbey National. And it was amazing. It was the most enthralling experience. You're right in the center of this kind of, I suppose, collapsing, decaying space. This is post what London used to be, and just before its rebuild as this kind of shopping mall experience. The next kind of main place, the most influential place for me was Rocking Russian, which was an agency started by Alex McDowell, who's now since become the most, I think, key art director in Hollywood. He did Minority Report. He's just done The Watchmen. He built the Terminal for The Terminal, the Tom Hanks movie. So he does all the art direction for Spielberg's movies and for Tim Burton's movies, a great old friend. And he set up a studio which was with money from the Rich Kids, which was started by Glenn Matlock, who was ex-Sex Pistols. So there was kind of people like Malcolm McLaren were around. Westwood was Vivienne Westwood was within a certain kind of connection distance. And Al made all the main T-shirts for the punk period, like Destroy and Fuck Out, Let's Dance, and the 2 Cowboys. And this was being run out of the same premises. It's important here to mention, I think, that the music scene in London was so vital, that there were independent concerts, there was a thriving independent record label scene here. And if it wasn't for that, people like myself and Vaughan Oliver and even Al McDowell and Peter Saville out of Manchester and Malcolm Garrett, we would not have survived. There would be no support system whatsoever. And this was allowing us to make a living, albeit a minimal living, but to be able to make a living pursuing ideas and explorations and having them published and put out into a public space. And that was vital, that was absolutely vital. And that was the difference. And London was this thriving, humming, inspiring, exciting place to be at this time. Anything was possible. And then out of that space, of course, grew The Face magazine. And Nick Logan, who started it, had been doing smash hits at EMAP. EMAP's offices were in central London near Carnaby Street, and Nick Logan had offered The Face magazine to them, and they turned it down. Of course, 30 years later, they finally succeeded in closing it. And they've just recently closed Arena magazine as well, so they've finally got their revenge. But Nick Logan's first office was in this damp basement on Broadwick Street. And I visited him there, and he'd come out of a different route in London. He'd come out of Tottenham mods. He grew up in Tottenham and was very much part of the mod scene about, you know, flashy dress, the sharpest person on the block. And this mod scene and the punk scene kind of clashed head on and formed finally The Face, and eventually came out as this new romantic thing, for which I was not interested. That was a completely separate thing. So you had like the Blitz Club, you had Taboo, you had all these other kinds of spaces, and I was much more interested in the industrial music scene at the time. So Cabaret Voltaire, down from Sheffield, and then Throbbing Gristle, and 23 Skidoo. 23 Skidoo I started working with because the singer of Skidoo was living in the room under me, poor guy, in the squat in Covent Garden. So that's how I'd met that side of things and got into all of that work possibility. London has a particular set of politics and cultural influences that has been absolutely instrumental in developing the work that I do. And there's a number of sources and ingredients for that. One is there's such a high level of conservatism in London. And when I was at college and leaving college, Thatcher and the right-wing government were pretty much running culture, and were trying to shift culture from a thinking space to a shopping space, and trying to suppress any kind of rebellious opposition. And this was a great driving force. Punk came out of that kind of oppressive, repressive space. It was an expression of independent, I suppose, individuality. It was a cry against this kind of bland culture. 25 years later, I see we've returned to the same kind of space, and returning to the same kind of space. And I think it's going to develop into an active, dangerous cultural space again. So London's political and cultural space has been an absolutely vital, I suppose, source of thought and source of impetus for my work.